Mansfield today on a Tuesday. As usual, we're joined by Advocate Lance Brogden. Now, last week we were talking to Alex Simeonidis, the CEO of Capital Legacy. And I did say to him at the time, or ask him at the time, if it would be possible to get him again on the show again this week, and joined with the MD of Capital Legacy, Brandon Garbett, because this is Wills Month, September. The week of the 13th of September being Wills Week, but we take it for an entire month here. So I thought let's take a look at these things called wills. Lance, why do we call it a last will and testament? I mean, aren't we saying the same thing here? Aren't we repeating ourselves? Is it just a way of lawyers making more money?
Obviously. No. Guys, really, it's using last will and testament goes way back in history, where the will actually referred to realty, to property, so your land and then all the assets accruing there too, where the testament part was about other assets, it could have been money, etc., vehicles, and as well to your wishes. But that was just many years ago. The two are interchanged now, but we still say last will and testament, but it's a will, and that's what we're busy with.
Okay, well, let's bring in the experts to handle wills. They're our partners on the business show. Capital Legacy in the form of Brandon Garbett, the MD, and Alex Simeonidis, the CEO. Thank you guys for joining us. And I'm going to leave this up to Lance. I love these sort of shows because I don't have to work, you see.
That's cool, Jeremy.
Hi, Jeremy. Hi, Lance.
How's it?
Hey, guys. Morning. How are you? A quick one. Let me give an example.
Yeah, very good. All good.
So, to get into it, Jeremy and I have a friend, Quito Estevez. He's a scatter cushion specialist. So let me position this. Quito has a will. He's married to Jan. In his will, he says, on my passing, I leave my scatter cushion collection to my wife. Quito, as we know, he's becoming a bit of a day drinker. His wife's had enough, boosts him into touch. They get divorced. He links up with Euphesia, and they make a life together. The problem is when Quito passes being a serious day drinker, we suck with a situation where his will still says, think about it, his will still says, I leave my scatter cushion collection to my wife. He doesn't have a wife now. Why I'm entering with an example like that, the two reasons. One, Jeremy and I will end up getting the scatter cushion collection, which is awful. But the more important thing is of having an updated will that's focused and the importance of one. Brandon, your thoughts?
Yeah, so what we've obviously been pushing for many years now is obviously to get a lot more valid and up-to-date wills back in safe custody. And I think we've often discussed, especially over the last sort of 9-10 years now, is the problem that arises in South Africa, where sort of 75% of people actually don't have an up-to-date and valid will, as part of their estate. And it's a big push from our side to make sure that we obviously get those wills back in safe custody. And the reason around that is because obviously people have got certain thoughts around what is important around a will. So many people have had the various reasons. Is procrastination is probably the number one. It's not really something that people wake up in the morning and go, hey, I haven't done my will, or hey, I need to update my will. That's the first thing. The second thing is obviously people don't actually understand the importance of a will. People actually think it's just for the wealthy or the rich or people who have large amounts of assets. And I think, Lance, as you said before, it's the importance of what is going to happen when one passes away. What actually does happen with those assets, or in this case, the scattered cushions. So what we're really trying to push is why actually have the will and what actually makes it valid. So we've got a few points that we actually want to sort of just discuss. That actually, the simple parts of why actually have a will, that when you actually draft a will or draw up a will, who can actually witness it, who can actually sign it. So many people say, I've got a will and this person has obviously signed it. But if the person is, let's for example, either the executor, a guardian that's mentioned in the will, one of the beneficiaries within the will, someone who's under the age of 14, they're actually not able or liable or valid to actually sign that will. So there's certain rules before one draws up a will to actually understand what actually makes that will valid, once it's in safe custody. So we can, as executors, execute that will. So small things like make sure that the person's over the age of 14 if they're going to witness it. Make sure that they're not a beneficiary within the will, because obviously that'll constitute it to be invalid. Make sure it's not actually the executor, it's actually the person who has to sign the will. There's many of these nuances that obviously first point of call is obviously get a will done, but then secondly to actually make sure that that will is actually valid, that we can actually execute it from an executor point of view.
Brandon, Alex, I mean, what I'm finding in my world is that two things. One, people try and make it so complex without thinking of the implications for the executor, for the family that remains behind. You want something that is clean and clear and can be quickly executed. And obviously, some people have large estates and lots of implications. I'm doing a couple of matters with the master at the moment where people have a lot of assets offshore, which makes it slightly different in the execution thereof. So once again, my question to you guys is, how do you advise your client in keeping it simple and accurate? And once again, then the importance of updating the will, because life circumstance changes. You can get divorced. You have grandkids that arrive on the scene, and people aren't updating. It's something very important, and I think you guys are on the cutting edge.
Yeah, so to your point there, Lance, what you're talking about there with your scattercushion approach or example is that you need professional consultation. You can't just go onto Google and download a will because you don't know what you don't know. You can't just write down something on a napkin. A professional would have said to you, don't just say your wife, name your wife in your example. A professional in your other example will say, you've got offshore assets. Where are those offshore assets? Do they sit in a certain jurisdiction where we could use a South African worldwide will the will can actually work from here internationally, or do we need to actually set up a will in the other country where the assets may be? So I think the underlying theme here is that you need to get professional consultation, and that professional, if they're worth their salt, will make sure that will is as simple and clear-cut as possible. When we're sitting with clients to try distinguish between what's going to hold up the estate and cause ambiguity and what's going to create a nice, clean, crisp will for us to execute, we draw a distinction between what are your bequests, what are your wishes. So, for example, your wishes are how you want to be buried, who you want to look after your kids. Your bequests are when you leave something like a property to someone, or your scatter cushions to someone. And often people get held up on the wishes, and that actually holds up a whole will, when actually they're only wishes, and those wishes normally actually cause a whole lot of confusion in the will. Even with the master, they sometimes misinterpret the wishes. So our suggestion to everyone is try to keep your wishes separate and keep your will as short and sweet and to the point about your bequests and legacies as possible.
Alex, that's great. That's what I wanted to hear. Another thing, Brandon, maybe from your side, the thing I pick up is people don't understand. When I pass away, I'm gone. That's fine. But the quicker these things are wound up, the less trauma for the family, relatives, associates, business partners that's left behind. And one of my selling points when I say go to professional guys like Capital Legacy, go see these guys. They know what they're doing. There's a reason for saying that. Is because you want to be responsible, not rooting from the grave, that's another whole debate, but you want to be responsible to make sure life goes on for those that are still here.
100%. And I think where a lot of people, when they obviously drop the will and obviously do their financial planning, is they don't think what's going to happen post once they've gone. And I know that kind of sounds a bit silly because your financial planning is supposed to be that. But I think what a lot of people do is actually look at what actually happens once a person passes or once they've passed away. Have we left enough money to the family to look after themselves? But a real big problem that has actually arisen, it's always been a problem, but it's really been highlighted over the last sort of 9-10 years, is what we call the real cost of dying, or the real cost of passing away. And what is that? That's the certain expenses that someone actually doesn't see. So that would be taking care of debts, the cost of actually winding up the estate. So the executor fee, because, Lance, as you well know, I don't think in the past you've worked for free when you've wound up estates. There's a certain cost to it. And people do not actually understand these costs. So we see it all the time with the estates that come in, that they think that their spouse has actually put a good financial plan in place to look after them once they pass away. But unfortunately, there's some costs that have to be taken care of. And people might be wealthy in terms of assets. They might have a lot of properties, but the money's tied up in there. But who actually looks after the family while that estate's being wound up? And remember, estates can take over 9 months to actually wind up. What actually happens to that spouse, those beneficiaries, those kids, while this whole process is taking place? And what we obviously do at Capital Legacy is what we obviously encourage people when they take out the will is obviously focus and look at what are those expenses that are going to happen when one passes away. So some simple ones is your executor fee that one actually needs to pay to wind up the will. You need to pay a professional person to actually wind up the estate. Secondly is if you have a minor, obviously you're encouraged to obviously put all the assets that you want to pass on to your minor in a testamentary trust that will obviously look after them. And then things like conveyancing. So when one has to obviously move a property, there's obviously conveyancing charges that obviously that are charged. And we often actually see where someone goes, well, when I pass away, my spouse will just take over the house. And we obviously say, well, how is it currently? And so, well, I own 50% and my spouse owns 50%. So great, but now if you're moving that property, we actually have to move that 50% over to you. And that obviously needs an attorney to obviously do the conveyancing. I don't know about you, Lance, but I don't know too many attorneys that actually work for free, and there's obviously going to be a charge to that. So when we're obviously when we're obviously drawing up the will, we actually look at these sort of expenses that people have actually not acknowledged in the past. They've always thought, well, I've got enough life cover to look after the family. But they haven't thought about these costs that one will incur when that whole process of winding up the estate that can take 9 months actually happens. And that's where we see the biggest problem. That's where the biggest money problems actually come into play, because you're waiting for that life cover to pay out. But in the meantime, you've got to still pay your rates and taxes. You've still got to pay your medical aid. You've still got to pay for schooling. And it's a big problem that we actually see. And that's actually where the most panic comes in from families.
No,
And that's, once again, another reason why you need to have a professional working alongside you. You guys, thank you very much for joining us. Alex Simonidis, the CEO, and Brandon Garbett, the MD of Capital Legacy. Thank you very much for taking time out to briefly touch on this, and may we encourage everybody who's watching this insert just to make sure that your last will is in place, and if you need any professional advice, then we'd suggest that you get hold of Capital Legacy. All their details have been running on this interview while we've been talking about this. As we said, it is Wills Month this month. Make sure your will is in order. Lance, that's it from us.
Yep.
We're out of here. Should we go and have a beer?
Yep. One more question again. I
come
get
on.
one question every week.
Yes, of course you do.
So let me ask you. So last week I asked you what the worst advice you ever got.
Yes, and
I'm
I
going
told
to ask you, what's the best advice you ever got from a lawyer?
Jeepers, it's a difficult one. Don't eat the snow where the huskies go.
That's your lawyer mate in Canada, but that's good enough for me. Guys, thanks very much. Thanks to all of you guys. Thank you so much.
Cheers. We'll catch you next week once again with Advocate Lance Brogden right here on Mansfield Today. Goodbye.